She was 84 years old. She attended church every Sunday. She tended her garden. She sat on her porch and watched the desert light change over the Catalina Mountains. She lived in the same home in the Catalina Foothills neighborhood of Tucson, Arizona, for decades. She raised 3 children, largely on her own, after her husband died in 1988. She did not collapse. She kept going. Her daughter Savannah became the anchor of the Today Show on NBC, one of the most recognized journalists in the country. And through all of it, Nancy stayed quiet. She was not a public figure. She was a mother and a grandmother and a woman of faith who took her medication at 10 o'clock every night and removed her hearing aids before she went to sleep. At 84, she had limited mobility. She needed daily medication for conditions that could become life-threatening without it. She had a pacemaker implanted in her chest. The sheriff of Pima County said it at a press conference. He said she could not walk 50 yards by herself. That is the woman someone decided to study, to surveil, to plan against. That is the woman someone chose. On the evening of Saturday, January 31st, 2026, Nancy requested an Uber from her residence. The driver picked her up at 5:32 in the afternoon and took her to her daughter Annie's home, 4 miles away. She spent 4 hours there with Annie and Annie's husband, Tommaso Cioni. They had dinner. They played games. They spent time together the way a family does on a winter Saturday. At 9:48 that night, Tommaso drove Nancy home. He walked her to the front door. He says he confirmed she was safely inside. Then he drove away. That is the last time any member of the Guthrie family saw Nancy alive. 3 hours and 57 minutes passed. At exactly 1:47 in the morning of February 1st, 2026, a masked figure appeared at Nancy's front door. The FBI released still images on February 10th. The figure was dressed entirely in black, ski mask, nitrile gloves, an Ozark Trail 25-liter backpack from Walmart, armed. When the figure reached the doorbell camera, he did not hesitate. He did not scan the porch searching for the lens. He walked directly to it. He knew exactly where it was. He tapped it twice, lightly, the way someone touches a piece of furniture they have walked past every single day of their life. When tapping did not disable it, he reached into a nearby potted plant and covered the lens with foliage. Calm, deliberate, unhurried. At that exact same second, Nancy's pacemaker logged a sudden and severe cardiac spike. Not gradual, acute, instantaneous. The clinical signature of a conscious person who is suddenly and overwhelmingly terrified. The camera went dark at 1:47. Nancy's own heart confirmed something happened at 1:47. Those 2 data points are synchronized to the same second. That is not a coincidence. That is a record. The next external data point came at 2:28 in the morning when Nancy's pacemaker lost its connection to the bedside home monitoring unit in her bedroom. 41 minutes. Camera dark at 1:47. Pacemaker sync gone at 2:28. 41 minutes of complete external silence. Professional burglars operate on 5-minute windows. 10 minutes inside a stranger's home is considered sloppy. 20 minutes is reckless. 41 minutes inside the home of an elderly woman in the middle of the night is not a burglary gone long. It is a planned operation running on schedule. Think about everything that had to happen inside those 41 minutes. Nancy had to be located, confronted, and controlled. She is 84 years old, but the sheriff called her a woman of great sound mind. She would not simply cooperate. She had to be physically prepared for transport, moved from her bedroom through the house, out the front door, and loaded into a waiting vehicle, while someone monitored the street and kept the operation from alerting neighbors. Former FBI negotiator Chip Massey told reporters that controlling an elderly hostage while managing a physical extraction requires a level of coordination a single operator cannot sustain under that kind of time pressure. There was also evidence from the property that almost nobody gave enough attention to in the early weeks of the investigation. Fox News drone footage taken in the days after the disappearance showed that the floodlights at the rear of Nancy's home had been physically smashed before the abduction. The doorbell camera faces the front of the house. Someone disabled the front camera. Someone smashed the rear lighting. That is coordinated. That is two people who planned their entry points, agreed on their positions, and arrived with their roles already assigned. Front entry, rear darkness, simultaneous, pre-planned. Two people. Most people think of a pacemaker as a device that keeps a heart beating in rhythm. That is only half of what modern implanted cardiac devices do. They are also continuous data recorders. Every heartbeat logged with a timestamp. Every arrhythmia recorded. Many also contain accelerometers that can distinguish between a person walking voluntarily and a person being carried by someone else. Nancy's pacemaker had all of this, and it was connected to a bedside monitoring unit that transmitted her cardiac data to the manufacturer's cloud platform continuously. The FBI subpoenaed that data in the first week of February. The manufacturer complied. What forensic cardiac specialists found tells us, minute by minute, what happened to Nancy between 1:47 and 2:28 in the morning. At 1:47, the spike, sudden, severe, acute. Nancy was not asleep. A person taken from deep sleep does not produce that type of response at the precise moment a threat appears outside their door. Nancy was awake. She was conscious. And her heart confirmed it in data that cannot be faked or altered after the fact. In the minutes that followed, the heart rate did not come back down. It stayed elevated. The rhythm showed irregularities that forensic cardiologists associate with sustained extreme emotional distress, not a momentary fright that passes. Sustained terror. Whatever entered that house at 1:47 did not go away. It stayed. Approximately 15 to 20 minutes into that 41-minute window, the accelerometer data changed. The movement pattern shifted from voluntary to passive. Not Nancy walking, not Nancy moving room to room. Nancy being transported, being carried, being moved by someone else. The rhythm and duration of that movement is consistent with one specific thing, being placed inside a vehicle and driven away. And then, in the final 10 to 15 minutes before the sync stopped at 2:28, came the most disturbing finding in the entire pacemaker analysis. The natural beat-to-beat variation in a conscious person's heart rate, what cardiologists call heart rate variability, began to decrease. Not gradually, specifically, in a pattern that has one clinical meaning and one meaning only: pharmacological sedation. Someone administered a drug to Nancy Guthrie in the final minutes before that pacemaker lost contact with the outside world. An 84-year-old woman with a chronic heart condition was given a sedative in her own home in the middle of the night. You do not accidentally have medical-grade sedatives on your person. You do not stumble across them. You plan for them. You acquire them specifically for this purpose. You bring them with intent. This is the case ledger. If this is your first time here, we follow evidence. We don't protect powerful people. We don't move on until the case moves. Subscribe and turn on notifications. You don't want to miss what comes next in this one. At 2:28, the sync stopped, not because Nancy's heart stopped, because the vehicle she was in had driven far enough from her home that the monitoring unit could no longer reach the pacemaker's signal. At 2:28 in the morning of February 1st, 2026, Nancy Guthrie was alive. Her heart was beating. The device inside her chest confirmed it. 6 minutes later, at 2:36 in the morning, a Ring doorbell camera on a quiet residential back road called Camino Royale, 2.5 miles from Nancy's home, captured a vehicle passing through. Retired NYPD detective Pat Brosman analyzed the footage and assessed the vehicle as a Kia Soul. The timing matches the abduction window exactly. The road leads south toward Interstate 19. Interstate 19 runs directly toward Rio Rico, Arizona. Rio Rico sits 60 miles north of the Mexican border. The FBI confirmed its sub-office in Sonora. Mexico has been in contact with Mexican law enforcement in connection with this case. Here is the detail about that camera that should make every person watching this genuinely angry. The couple who owned that Ring camera were never contacted by law enforcement. Not once. They came forward on their own after watching news coverage. They found the footage themselves and brought it to investigators voluntarily. The reason law enforcement never came to them is that their house sits outside the 2-mile canvas radius investigators had established around Nancy's home. 2.5 miles away, the perimeter had stopped half a mile too short. Half a mile. That is the difference between finding that footage immediately and finding it weeks later because 2 private citizens happened to be watching the news. The FBI recovered 2 separate DNA profiles from 2 separate locations, both connected to the same crime. Profile 1 came from biological material found inside Nancy's home. Profile 2 came from a glove recovered 2 miles away. Both profiles belong to unknown males. Neither matches Nancy. Neither matches her family. Neither matched a single person in the FBI's CODIS database of 19 million known offender profiles. 2 people were there. Everything about the way this crime was executed, the surveillance campaign that preceded it, the 41-minute timeline, the disabled camera, the smashed rear floodlights, the sedative, the planned exit route, points to a specific kind of partnership. One person who had inside knowledge of that house. One person who had the physical capability to carry out the extraction. Neither of the men I'm about to discuss has been officially named by law enforcement as a suspect or a person of interest. Everything that follows comes from public records, documented facts, and named expert sources. Tommaso Scioni is 50 years old, born in Tuscany, Italy. He has been married to Nancy Guthrie, Nancy's daughter, since 2006. 20 years. 20 years of Friday night dinners. 20 years of walking through Nancy's front gate, past her cameras, through her front door, down her hallway, into her kitchen. He knew that house better than nearly anyone alive. He knew every room. He knew the layout in the dark. He knew the cameras. He also knew those cameras were not recording. Nancy's Nest camera system did not have an active cloud subscription. The cameras could detect motion and send alerts, but they were not storing continuous footage. They were props. The only people who would know those cameras were essentially decoration, or the people who spent time inside that house regularly. People who walked past them every Friday for 20 years. Tommaso is an AP biology teacher at a charter school in Tucson. His students learn PCR amplification, the exact technique forensic laboratories use to process crime scene DNA. They learn gel electrophoresis, the exact method used to create CODIS profiles. He puts on nitrile gloves every single working day. He knows how DNA transfers between surfaces. He knows what a forensic technician searches for, and he knows what they miss. The suspect on Nancy's porch was wearing nitrile gloves, the same gloves found in every biology classroom in America. Nitrile gloves are not perfect barriers against DNA transfer. Micro tears form during physical exertion. Sweat breaches the material within minutes. A biology teacher who teaches forensic science concepts would know this, which means he would also know to dispose of those gloves far from the scene. Miles away, in a location where nobody would think to look. Someone found one anyway. 2 miles from Nancy's home, with a male DNA profile inside it, not in CODIS. No match. On the evening of January 31st, Tommaso was the last known person to see Nancy alive. He drove her home. He walked her to the door at 9:50 in the evening. Then he drove away. 4 miles. 10 minutes on empty desert roads. No confirmed public alibi for Tommaso during the 3 hours and 57 minutes between when he dropped Nancy off and when the camera went dark has ever been released. Nancy was taken on the exact weekend that Savannah Guthrie was scheduled to travel internationally for NBC's coverage of the Winter Olympics. Olympic assignments are determined months in advance. If you wanted to target Nancy during the window when her most formidable family member would be as far away as possible and as occupied as possible, you would need to know Savannah's travel schedule. Who would know that schedule? Someone who sat at that family's dinner table for 20 years. The ransom demand was $6 million in Bitcoin, not $5 million, not $10 million, $6 million. A complete stranger demands $50 million because strangers think big. An insider with 20 years of dinner table conversations about money lands on $6 million because an insider knows what is actually reachable. The Bitcoin wallet has been completely inactive since it was created. The FBI sent a small test amount to the address. Zero activity. If this was genuinely about collecting a ransom, someone would have moved those funds. The medication left on Nancy's kitchen counter said the same thing. If you are kidnapping an 84-year-old woman for ransom, the most critical item in that house is her medication. A dead hostage is worth nothing. You take the pills. Whoever was in that house left them behind. When Nancy disappeared, every member of her family went public. Savannah posted videos begging for help. She offered $1 million of her own money as a reward. Annie cooperated with investigators. Every member of that family screamed into the void, except one person. Tommaso Cioni did not post a statement. Not one word. He did not appear in a video. He did not stand beside his wife while she begged the world to find her mother. Silence is a choice. And people make that choice when their attorney tells them every word out of their mouth is a potential exhibit at trial. The Pima County Sheriff publicly cleared the family in February 2026, but federal agents returned to Annie and Tommaso's home more than 5 separate times after that clearance. They removed items in brown paper bags, used specifically to preserve biological evidence. Annie's vehicle was towed and impounded. Their septic tank was physically examined. Security cameras were removed from their property. You do not do that to people you have cleared. Nancy's pacemaker is still inside her chest. Right now, that device is still running, still logging every heartbeat with a timestamp. Every moment she has experienced since 2:28 in the morning of February 1st is recorded inside a device the size of a small matchbox implanted in the chest of an 84-year-old woman who deserves to be home. The DNA evidence is at Quantico. The genetic genealogy analysis is running. The cell towers do not lie. The pacemaker data does not lie. The car on Camino Royale at 2:36 in the morning does not lie. Every partnership built on secrecy has a breaking point. In a 2-person operation, the first person who cooperates receives the reduced exposure. The second receives the full weight of everything prosecutors have been building. Whatever held 2 men together was not built for this. Trust erodes. It erodes fastest of all when $1 million in anonymous cash is sitting there waiting for whoever picks up the phone first. She tended her garden. She went to church every Sunday. She never once imagined that someone was out there studying the rhythm of her life, deciding she was the target. She did not ask for any of this. And somewhere, right now, a device the size of a small matchbox is still counting. This was part 1. The timeline, the pacemaker, the evidence that 2 people were inside that house. Part 2 goes deeper. Into the second man, the evidence keeps finding. The financial trail that started 8 months before Nancy disappeared, and the sealed 911 call that a retired detective says will not be released until a trial date is set. Subscribe and turn on notifications. You do not want to come back and find out you missed it.